What's up, kings and queens? Now, do you spend hours doing research on NBA player props and still feel left undecided on what to pick? Or do you not have the time, resources, or knowledge to dive into all the numbers? Look, either way, I've got you covered. In this video, I'll be taking you through the most comprehensive NBA player prop preview you're going to see for this upcoming slate. And with all this information, you can do whatever the hell you want with it. Same game parlays, single bets, some alternate lines, whatever you want to do, I got the information to help you. Now, in this video, I'll be sharing my screen. I'll be taking you through outlier.bet to sort through all of this data. If you're interested in taking your research to the next level, you can check out the link in the description box. It's a 7-day free trial for Outlier. Go ahead and check it out. Let's go. So we're kicking things off with the New York Knicks versus the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, I wanted to preface this by saying that this is a 12-game slate, and that's a shit ton of players to get through. So I'm going to hit on the main ones, the ones that I think are probably worth betting on. If there's a lot of rubbish out there, I'm not even going to waste any time. But talking about the Knicks versus 76ers, in terms of the lineup, we know that Randall's out, OG Anunoby's out, Mitchell Robertson's still out for the Knicks. Hardenstein and Bogdanovic, they're game time decisions. And for the 76ers, obviously Joel Embiid is out, and Nicholas Batum is a game time decision. Let's kick it off with Precious Achiuwa. Now, for someone like him, you probably only look at his points and rebounds in this type of game. First, you look at his point prop. His line's at 12.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. And looking at head-to-head matchups, last time he versed the 76ers, he only had 5 points. So a little bit hesitant. If Hardenstein doesn't go, might be worth playing. Looking at his rebound prop, his line for that, he's at 9.5. So it is very high. But he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The matchup is somewhat decent for a power forward, with the 76ers allowing the 5th most rebounds to power forward. But if Achiuwa does play center, the matchup does get a little bit more difficult. Let's check out his numbers with Isaiah Hartenstein out of the lineup. And we can see in his last 2 games, 14 and 17 rebounds without Hartenstein. So potential, but the matchup could be difficult for Precious Achiuwa. Donte DiVincenzo, prior to the All-Star break, this man was a money-making machine because he was shooting that rock like a kid in high school, but you shouldn't make those types of jokes, should you? So Donte, shooting the ball a lot. Firstly, his points line is 19.5, and you can get that for plus money. So that's somewhat arousing for me. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup's neither good nor bad. 76ers ranking in the middle of the pack in terms of points allowed to shooting guards. So recent form's okay. 7 out of his last 10. Last time he versed the 76ers, he finished with 14 points. He only played 16 minutes, though, and he only attempted 6 shots. Now, something to compare it to, in his last 10 games, he's playing almost 37 minutes per game. Over his last 8 games, he's averaging 40. In terms of shot attempts, he's shooting the ball 20 times a game. So with his increased minutes, increased production, Daft says, or Daft, I never call myself that. People call me that. Dan says, I think he goes over here. I think the 19.5 is very good based on volume alone. If this guy's going to shoot the ball 20 times and you're getting plus money, I do like the over for Donte DiVincenzo. But I'll tell you right now, I'm going to leave that as a lean. If you are interested in following my bets, I will have a pinned comment. I'll let you know what I'm taking. I'll let you know what the leans are as well. But for right now, Donte DiVincenzo, that is a lean, my friend. A quick look at his assists. He's a guard. Could get a good opportunity there. The matchup is good. The 76ers allow the 8th most assists to shooting guards. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. And he had 3 assists against the 76ers the last time they played. And remember, he only played 16 minutes. So for Donte DiVincenzo to get 3.5 assists, which is 4 at plus money, shit, I don't mind that as well. So that's a good lean too. Whilst we're on the topic of DiVincenzo, let's look at his rebounds. His line's at 4.5. That's also at plus money, but the matchup is difficult, and he's only hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games, and he only had 2 rebounds the last time they played. So I'm liking his points, and I'm liking his assists. But we can see here, he had 17 in only 16 minutes, right? He's playing 40 minutes based off these numbers. He's probably getting 39 points and assists, which won't happen. But in his last 10, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. But if we're looking at the odds, I'd probably take his points or his assists as a single bet, purely because you're getting those for plus money. Shit, I might even take them both. But Donte DiVincenzo, I like what I'm seeing with that one. Paul Reed, I just want to have a look at his rebounds. He's starting center now. playing a lot more minutes with Embiid out of the lineup. The matchup's a difficult one, though. The Knicks allow the 8th fewest rebounds to centers. In his last 10, he's only hit this 3 times. If Hartenstein's not good to go, this might be a good play. But for now, not interested in taking anything on Paul Reed. Buddy Hield, absolutely love this man. He's been making me a ton of money ever since he moved to the Philadelphia 76ers. So his points prop, 16.5. He's only hit this in 5 out of his last 10, but that's not very important because he's played 4 games for the Philadelphia 76ers now, and he's scored 20, 23, 24, and 22. If you remember the last time I think he played, I took him for 20 points, and we got that at well over plus money, so lifted that line up. This line's at 16.5. The matchup is somewhat difficult. The Knicks allow the 5th fewest points to shooting guards on the season. But despite the matchup, I think on volume alone, he could get there. He's going to have the ball quite a lot. He's playing a lot of minutes. So I do like Buddy Hield for points. But what I also like him for is his assists. So his line's at 4.5, and you can get that for plus 130. And you can see here, these are the 4 games since joining the 76ers. 6, 8, and 10. The matchup is somewhat on the difficult side, but given the lack of depth that the 76ers have, I still think this is a great pick. Buddy Hield over in assists. Kyle Lowry is expected to play in this game, but we don't know how many more minutes. But they have Kyle Lowry and Cam Payne as guards off the bench. I think Buddy is still going to get a lot of time and a lot of opportunity in this one. Personally, the way that I'm going to attack this game, I'm going to have a look at Buddy Hield points and assists. So I'm taking the over 20.5 for Buddy Hield, just letting you know now, because I think this line's going to move or the odds are going to get reduced. And you can see in the 4 games since joining Philly, 26, 29, 32, and 32, 20.5. That's low. I might even take an alternate line for this, depending on what odds we can get. But I'm certainly feeling Buddy Hield for this one. Isaiah Hartenstein, his game time decision, so I'm not going to spend too much time on him. Or Bogdanovic. Josh Hart, something I want to play around with. And the main prop that I like here for Josh Hart is rebounds. Now, he's been absolutely smacking this out of the park. Check this out. 9 out of his last 10 games, he's covered this line of 7.5. Problem though, 7.5 is a bit too low for me. So I'd look to take that at 8.5 if you can get it for plus money. I had a look at my sports books and I was getting close to plus money, but I was like, shit, I need to chase the value here. Josh Hart, what I've ultimately taken for this, I've taken him for 10 rebounds, and I'm getting that for $3, which is plus 215. To $3.15, I'm getting plus 215. So pretty huge odds here for Josh Hart to get 10 rebounds. He's gotten 10 plus rebounds in 8 out of his last 10. And if we look at the matchup, it's excellent. The 76ers are the 2nd most rebounds to small forwards on the season. And if you look at head-to-head matchups, Josh Hart had 15 rebounds the last time these guys played. So I'm not taking the 8.5. I've moved it straight to 10. I didn't want to put too much money with multiple bets on Josh Hart, but I thought I'm chasing some cash here. So you do with that whatever you wish, but Josh Hart rebounds. I got a feeling he's going over there. Let's have a look at Tobias Harris. Now, I don't like betting on Tobias Harris, but giving you a heads up, I have. Real quick at his points prop, it's at 18.5. He's only hit this in 6 out of his last 10. And he's hit, this is the under I'm talking about. Let me switch this back to the over. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10, and he's gone under in 4 straight games against the Knicks. So I don't want to take his points prop. To be honest, I'll jump straight to the prop that I am taking. I do like his rebound prop, but I like it in the first quarter. So real quick, look at the rebounds here. He's hit this in 3 out of his last 5 games against the Knicks, but he's gone under in 2. His last 10 games, he's covered this line of 5.5 in 6 out of the 10. But for 5.5, you're getting minus 135. And I don't like that. What I do like is his first quarter rebound prop, which is 1.5. You're getting that for plus money. So you know I'm all about plus money. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games, which is great. And if you look at the head-to-head matchups with the Knicks, he's gone over 1.5 rebounds in 5 consecutive games against the Knicks. So let's go. Tobias Harris, first quarter rebounds. If you're getting it at plus money, that's something I'd consider taking if I was you. But I've already placed my bet. So I'm liking Tobias Harris to go over that first quarter rebound prop. Who else is there in this game? We've got Jalen Brunson. Let's have a look at JB. His points line is at 29.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. 76ers allow the fourth fewest points to point guards on the season. In head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 4 out of 5, so he's only hit this once. Looking at his assist prop's at 6.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 5 against the 76ers. The matchup's neither good nor bad, but looking at his last 10, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. So, look, Jalen Brunson's lines are way too high for me. I'm not saying take the under because I can see him covering both of these really, but I think there are a lot better players on the market at the moment. So I'm choosing not to play on Jalen Brunson. The next player that we're looking into is Kelly Oubre Jr. Have it in his points prop is 14.5, and I do like this. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10. The matchup's pretty good. The Knicks allow the 8th or 9th most points to small forwards on the season. In head-to-head matchups, he did score 15 points the last time these teams played. So Kelly Oubre points, I don't mind that at all. The matchup is good. 8 out of his last 10. Scored 15 points in his last matchup against them. I'm leaning that at the moment, but what I'm also leaning is his points and his rebounds. So his rebound prop is a little bit inconsistent, but I want to show you guys something. Looking at his last 10, he's hit this in 8 out of his last 10 games. The matchup for rebounds is pretty good too. I am leaning this one over just his points prop. Is you're getting better odds if you take points and rebounds plus 100. You know, I'm all about better odds. And in head-to-head matchups, he scored 15 points the last time they played, but he pulled down 7 rebounds. So he has had a big rebounding game against him in the past. Over his last 10, he has had some big rebounding games. The games where he didn't have a strong rebounding performance, he didn't score well either. So I think there's a better chance he goes over his points and rebounds than just his points alone. So Kelly Oubre, points and rebounds, definitely a lean for me right now. I'm on the fence with how I play it. Maybe I play only 1 unit instead of 2. But yeah, that's definitely something I'm considering. Let's have a look at Tyrese Maxey. Now, I don't have a play on Tyrese Maxey, and let me explain to you why. His points prop is at 26.5. He's only hit this 3 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is difficult. The Knicks allow the second fewest points to point guards. I'm leaning an under, but the last time I took an under, Tyrese Maxey scored 51 points. So, a little bit hesitant. In head-to-head matchups, he's also covered this in 3 out of his last 4 games against the New York Knicks. So Tyrese Maxey, difficult matchup, average form in the last 10, but he's done it before against the Knicks. So I'm quite hesitant on that. Looking at his assists, he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. His line is at 6.5. The matchup's not good nor bad. And the last time they played, he had 9 assists, but he's covered this in 2 out of his last 4. So we're jumping into the Detroit Pistons versus the Indiana Pacers. Cade Cunningham, Quentin Grimes, Isaiah Stewart, all game-time decisions. For the Pacers, Aaron Naismith is out of this game, and Jalen Smith is a game-time decision. Looking into the player props, let's check out Benedict Mathurin to kick things off. His points line here is 14.5 points in terms of the matchup. The Detroit Pistons allow the 14th fewest points to shooting guard, so the matchup's neither good nor bad. Made a little bit of noise in All-Star Weekend, beefing with Jaden Ivey. So that'd be really interesting to see. Either of them could be really motivated for this one. But in terms of form, Mathurin's only hit this in 2 out of his last 10. Last matchup against the Pistons, he scored 30. He's actually scored this. He's covered this line in 4 straight games against the Pistons. So I lean to the over. I think there might be, no, I wouldn't say bad blood, but a little bit of competitive edge in terms of the Mathurin versus Ivey matchup. So I do lean to the over despite the form over the last 10 games, but you don't know if he's going to get minutes. That's one issue. And if he's not getting minutes, he's probably not going to take the shot. So I'd be a little bit hesitant to take Benedict Mathurin, but that Ivy matchup does excite me a little bit. Talking about Jaden Ivey, his points line is at 17.5 in this game. The Pacers do allow the 12th most points to shooting guards on the season. Looking at his last 10, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And then up against the Pacers, he's covered this in 3 straight now. The game he went under, he finished with 17 points. So if Cade Cunningham is out, most likely this line's going to skyrocket. But I do lean to the over for Jaden Ivey in this one. Looking at his assists, his line's at 3.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The Pacers allow the 4th fewest assists to shooting guards. He's gone under in his last 2, went over in the 2 prior to that. Quick look at his boards. His line's at 3.5. He's gone under in his last 2 games against the Pacers. And in his last 10, he's hit this 5 out of the last 10. And the Pacers do allow the 2nd fewest rebounds to shooting guards. So for Jaden Ivey, I'd only consider his points prop. If anything, that's what I'd be looking at for Jaden Ivey. Jumping into Miles Turner, his points prop is at 18.5 points. We can see that he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is pretty good. The Pistons do allow the 10th most points to centers on the season. Miles Turner has covered this in 2 straight games against the Pistons, scoring 23 points in both games. So absolutely leaning to the over. Miles Turner is not someone I like to bet on, but I do lean to the over for Miles Turner if you're interested. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 6.5. He's only covered in 4 out of his last 10. The matchups, neither good nor bad. In terms of head-to-head matchups, he did cover this in both games against the Pistons. 10 and 8 rebounds. So we know Jalen Duren, he's probably not going to move too far away from the ring on the offensive side of the ball. So Miles Turner, most likely going to be in a good position to get some boards. So if you want to look at his points and rebounds prop, perhaps, maybe that's a little bit more convincing. Let's check that out. He's only hit that in 5 out of his last 10, and obviously he hit it both times against the Pistons. So the matchup is good. Miles Turner, is he one of those players that takes advantage of the matchups? We shall see. But I'm not taking the pick, but I would lean to the over. The next one we're looking at is Asar Thompson. His points props at 11.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. I'm not really interested in that because this man is a rebounding machine, but a lot of it depends on minutes because we don't know whether he's going to get time or not, right? So he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. His line's at 6.5, and you can get that for plus money. The matchup is great. The Pacers allow the 6th most rebounds to small forwards. The problem is he's playing on average 24 to 28 minutes per game. And in that span, he's been rather inconsistent in terms of getting boards. Sometimes he starts, sometimes he doesn't. So it can be a little bit difficult betting on Asar Thompson. Haven't seen the lineups for tomorrow, but what we did see after the trade deadline, new recruit Simone Fontecchio, he's been starting more games than Asar Thompson. My preference for this particular game is to take a look at Simone Fontecchio because I think there's something that I do like in it. Let me just check this out real quick. Points-wise, 4 out of his last 10. The matchup is great, but rather inconsistent. He's either crushing this line or he's not getting close. What I do like is his rebound prop for this one. So he just went through Asar Thompson's, but check this out for Fontecchio. His line is at 3.5, minus 108, so pretty decent odds. We saw earlier the matchup's pretty good. 6th most rebounds to small forwards on the season. The Pacers are allowing. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10 games. He went under against the Suns and the Charlotte Hornets, who are Hornets. That's an easy matchup for small forwards, not going to lie. But the Phoenix Suns, that's the most difficult matchup in basketball if you're looking at rebounds to small forwards. In terms of minutes, he does play at least 20 minutes a night. It goes up to 25 to 30. So within 20 minutes, we can see that he can hit this rebound line. I do like what I'm seeing here. The odds are pretty good. The matchup is there, and he's obviously a lot more consistent in hitting his line compared to someone like Asar Thompson. Asar Thompson will get more rebounds than Fontecchio, I believe. They probably share minutes. Equal opportunity. Simone Fontecchio, great matchup, much lower line. That's the way that I'm going. Give me Simone Fontecchio to go over his rebound line. What else are we going to look at? Tyrese Halliburton. He killed it from downtown in that All-Star game. Shout out to anyone who took him his 3-point prop. That was easy money. Looking at his points prop, line's at 20.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup, actually, I'll take that back. The line is 20.5, and he's only covered 3 out of his last 10. The matchup is a good one, though. The Pistons allow the 5th most points to point guards. In head-to-head matchups, he's only covered this in 2 out of his last 3. Now, not many people would back Tyrese Halliburton points, and look, neither will I. But what you may be looking at is an assist prop. He's an assist god. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. He's covered it in 3 straight games, and in those 3 games, we started to see him play 30-plus minutes once again. So that minutes restriction is long and gone. Playing more than 30 minutes, he's covered this line in 3 consecutive games. I don't like the odds for this, though, minus 125. The matchup's not a bad one. And in terms of head-to-head, he had 16 assists the last time they played, and he had 10 assists the 2 games prior to that. So, look, chances are he does go over this line, but at these odds, I'm not willing to play him. We're having a look at Jalen Duren. His points line is at 14.5. You can get that for plus 100. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. The matchup with Philly is a difficult one. They allow the 9th. I mean, not Philly. The Pacers. They allow the 9th fewest points to centers on the season. In terms of matchup, he's only hit this in 1 out of his last 5 games against them. So definitely leaning to the under here. But if you're getting plus money for the over, probably getting bad odds for the under anyway. So points prop for Jalen Duren, I'm not keen on playing that. Let's have a look at his rebound prop. That line is at 11.5. That seems quite high at first glance, but looking at his form in the last 10, he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The matchup a difficult one. The Pacers allow the 6th fewest rebounds to centers on the season. And in head-to-head matchups, he's only covered this in 1 out of his last 5. Now, you can get plus money if you're brave enough to take the over in this one. He has had some monster rebounding games. The matchup's somewhat difficult. I'd prefer not to play anything on Jalen Duren based off what I'm seeing right now. But look, if you decide to play something, that's on you, my boy. But you might play something and win. So make sure you do your research first. Let's have a look at Pascal Siakam. His points props at 22.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games. The matchup with the Pacers is a good one. They do allow the 6th most points to power forwards on the season. But one thing I want to call out, the Pistons. The Pistons allow the 6th. Sorry, look, All-Star break killed me. That was 7 days off of doing what I was doing every single day. My apologies if I'm a bit rusty. The matchup is decent. The Pistons allow the 6th most points to power forwards on the season. Siakam hasn't versed the Pistons in a Indiana Pacers uniform yet. Yeah, he's covered 4 out of his last 10, 22.5. It does seem a little bit steep to me. The matchup is okay. Maybe an alternate play for Pascal Siakam for your same game parlays, but look, I'm not feeling it. Looking at his rebounds, the matchup's not good nor bad. Pacers rank 15th in the league in rebounds to power forwards. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10 games, though. So once again, leaning to the under, but you're not going to get great odds for that either. Looking at his assists, his line's at 3.5. If he was a Pacer, he'd eat that up all day. But now that I did it again. If he was a Raptor, but now that he's a Pacer, I'm not a big fan of it. He's hit it in 6 out of his last 10 games. He tends to get more when Halliburton's not there. As we know, Halliburton should play over 30 minutes in this game, which means Siakam to get 3.5 assists. It's not something that I'm willing to entertain. Based on my lean for the under for everything, maybe an under on his PRA could be on the cards. Check this out. Line's at 32.5. If you look at the under, you might get, you get minus 105. So looking at the under, he's hit that in 7 out of his last 10 games, which is good. The points match up, probably the most difficult one, but for everything else, it's not too bad. Lean into the under on the PRAs for Pascal Siakam, but look, 12-game slate, a lot of players, a lot of picks. I think there are much better opportunities out there. Let's jump into the next one. Looking at the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Orlando Magic. Markelle Fultz is out. Donovan Mitchell's a game-time decision in this one. But let's have a look at what we got here. Caris LeVert. His points line's at 9.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. In terms of matchup, the Magic allow the 9th fewest points to shooting guards on the season. The reason why I bring up Caris LeVert is because if Donovan Mitchell does not play, this man should see a lot more opportunity. So looking at his last 10 games without Donovan Mitchell, he's covered this line in 8 of his last 10. Hasn't played a head-to-head game against them without D. Mitch in the lineup, but the reason why I'm showing you this is if Donovan Mitchell is not able to go, this line's definitely going to move up, and then it might be difficult for him to hit. But based on this line at 9.5, depending on if you get word of Donovan Mitchell, Caris LeVert over in his points might be a good play. Hello, Banchero. Let's check this boy out. His points line is at 20.5. He's hit 20.5 points in 7 out of his last 10 games. The Cavaliers allow the 5th fewest points to power forwards on the season. And he's hit this in 3 out of his last 6 games against the Cavs, but he has gone under in his last 2. So nothing really arousing there. When it comes to Banchero, lately it's been looking at his assists. So firstly, he's hit his assist prop in 1 out of his last 6 games against the Cavs. He did hit it in his last game against them, though. Looking at his last 10. So he's covered this in 9 out of his last 10, finished on 5 assists against the Knicks. Keeping in mind, over in his assist prop is minus 125. The matchup is a difficult one. Now, before this Knicks game, I remember calling out that despite how good this assist prop may look, I'm not taking it because he's bound to fuck it up eventually. And then he did. Went under against the Knicks, finished with only 5 assists. Looking at this matchup against the Cavs, it's probably harder than the matchup against the Knicks. So at 125, I wouldn't consider taking Banchero's over. Chances are he does get over, right? This form is not a fluke. There's something happening within that strategy within the team. But at those odds, I'm not willing to entertain it. If you wanted to get plus money, you'd have to take 6.5. And I'm definitely not taking a 6.5 against this Cleveland Cavaliers team. Jumping into Franz Wagner. His points prop is at 19.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is a good one against the Cavs. They do allow the 7th most points to small forwards on the season. And in head-to-head matchups, Franz has struggled. He's gone under in 5 straight, hitting in 1 of his last 6. So that leaves me a little bit hesitant. 19.5 though, you are getting plus money for Franz, so I don't hate that. The matchup is good, but he has struggled against the Cleveland Cavaliers in the past, and I don't know if he's gotten past that yet. In terms of his assists, his line's at 3.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup's not good nor bad. And head-to-head matchups, he's hit this in 3 out of his last 6. So rather inconsistent. I personally won't be making any plays on Franz Wagner in this game. Having a look at Evan Mobley. So he's been a little bit of a cash cow since he came back from injury. Been performing quite well. His line's at 14.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Tough matchup against the Magic, who allow the 3rd fewest points to power forwards. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 4, most recently scoring 16 points against the Orlando Magic. So I think the line's, honestly, it's perfect. You can see how many times he's finished on 14. He's finished on 16 points and 14 points last 2 games against the Cavs. That 14.5, I think that line's smack on, and I'm not willing to play it. Looking at his rebound prop, line's at 9.5, but it's minus 135. That's not good. Magic allowed the 7th fewest rebounds to power forwards on the season. It's a difficult matchup. He's only hit this in 5 out of his last 10, and he's gone under in 3 of his last 4 against the Magic. So I'm not liking the over for Evan Mobley's rebounds. The odds are crap. Chances are he goes under, but he still might go over. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of this pick at all. So, Evan Mobley, I'll look at you another day, my boy. And let's have a look at Jared Allen. Check out his points and rebounds prop. Line's at 15.5, quite similar to Mobley. Matchup, somewhat difficult. Magic allow the 12th fewest points to centers on the season. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. And against the Magic, he's gone under in 4 consecutive games. So, that alone leaves me quite hesitant to take an over for Jared Allen in points. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 11.5. You can get that for plus money. I like plus money. He's hit it in 3 out of his last 10, and he's gone under in 4 straight games against the Magic. So, look, based on the numbers, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen have struggled against the Magic in the past. I'm not confident in taking either of them. One of them is going to go over for sure. I can't see them both struggling in the same game, but I'm quite hesitant to take it. Donovan Mitchell, let's have a quick look at his points and his assist prop. Here's a game time decision, so not sure whether he does play, and if he does play, how many minutes. So I'd be hesitant to bet on him, but he's hit his points prop 25.5 in 8 of his last 10 games. The matchup is a difficult one against the Magic, as is for every single position. Head-to-heads, he's gone under in his last 2 against the Magic, hitting in 3 of 6 overall. Assist-wise, you're looking at 5.5, which is covered in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup is awful. And in head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 3 out of his last 6. Last time he versed the Magic, he had 13 assists. So, Donovan Mitchell, I'm not a fan of playing. One lean that I do have, though, is on Mo Wagner. He doesn't play many minutes, but he can get shit done. So I'm not going to go through every single prop. I just want to take you straight to the lean. And what I'm looking at is his points and his rebounds prop. So his line for that one is 10.5. And of course, if I was going to look at it, it'd have to be plus money, which it is, plus 104. So check this out. Last 10 games, he's covered this line 8 times. 8 out of 10, he's covered 10.5 points and rebounds. The matchup, it's not bad. Points, Cavs allow the 7th fewest points to centers, and they're smack bang in the middle of the league in terms of rebounds allowed to centers. In head-to-head matchups, Wagner's hit this in 4 out of his last 6. When he versed them earlier this year, 15 points and 4 rebounds, finishing on 19 points and rebounds. He did that in 18 minutes. So as you can see, 18 minutes. He was playing last 2 games. He's averaging about 18 minutes against them. In his last 10 games, he's averaging about 16 minutes. So his minutes aren't there, right? Minutes are low, but he can hit this line in limited minutes. So it's a strong lean because his hit rate is very good and the odds are great. So I haven't decided whether I'm going to bet it yet, but that's something I wanted to share with you all. Here's Garland. I'm not betting on him. He's just started to play his full complement of minutes, but let me take you through what he's doing anyway. I think his last 5 games is probably more applicable given that he was on a minutes restriction, but his points prop, he's hit it in 1 out of his last 5, but he has hit it very well against the Magic in the past. The matchup, the Magic allow the 10th fewest points to point guard. So Darius Garland, if Mitchell is out especially, his points prop might be the way to go. And in terms of assists, in his last 5, he's covered it in 4 out of his last 5. The matchup is difficult, and against the Magic, he's hit this in 2 out of his last 4. So maybe a points and assist prop might be the way to go against Darius Garland. You can see he's hit his points and assist prop in 4 consecutive games against the Orlando Magic. We don't mind that. And looking at his last 5, though, he's only hit this once. But he did severely underperform on the point side of things. So if I was going to bet a Darius Garland prop, it would probably be points and assists. But that didn't even make my list in terms of leans. So I'm going to have to pass on that. Let's jump into the next game. We're looking at the Toronto Raptors versus the Brooklyn Nets. Having a look at Bruce Brown first. Now, this man can do it all. Points, rebounds, and assists. Checking to see if he's got any good form lines. Points-wise, line at 10.5 plus money. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. Matchups not good nor great against the Brooklyn Nets. Nothing screaming out to me there. Rebound-wise, lines at 3.5, only 4 out of his last 10, and assists I know aren't going to be good anyway. Let's have a look at Nick Claxton. So his points line is at 12.5. In terms of the matchup, the Raptors allow the 8th most points to centers for the season. And his last 10 games, though, he's only hit this twice, 2 out of his last 10. And against the Toronto Raptors, though, he's got great form. He's hit this in 5 consecutive games. So his form against the Raptors is good. His matchup is good, but his recent form has not been. I'm looking at his shot attempts. He's playing 28 minutes a game. He's attempting on average 8.8 shot attempts per game, but he's got lows of 4, 5, and 6, and 7. If he's taken that many shots, he's not going to cover this line. So on volume alone, I don't think I could take this play. The matchup is good. I want to check to see what the shot attempts have been when he plays them. 8.4. So he shoots at an extremely high percentage when he plays the Raptors. That's a lot of dunks and layups. So you probably need him to shoot at least 75% from the field if he's going to cover this line. So, yeah, I'm not too confident taking Nick Claxton, but there might be some people who are. Rebound-wise, his line's at 9.5. It's minus 135. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 and 3 of his last 5 games against the Nets. The Nets do allow the Raptors. They do allow the 10th most rebounds to centers on the season, but I'm not a fan of Nick Claxton. Jakob Poeltl, with the right matchup, this guy can easily cover his lines. He shoots an excellent percentage inside, but you don't know when he's going to take the shots. So looking at the points, his line's at 12.5. You can get that plus money. He's hit that in 6 out of his last 10 games. The matchup's not good nor bad. His last game against the Nets, he only scored 6 points. Rebound-wise, he got 9 rebounds, but his line's at 9.5, and he's hit that in 5 out of his last 10 games. The Brooklyn Nets do allow the 6th most rebounds to centers on the season. So even that for Jakob Poeltl, I'm not overconfident in. I'm not going to go through Michael Bridges. I see too many people bet on Michael Bridges, and I don't understand why. I would never bet on this guy unless I'm taking the under, so I'm not even going to have a look at it. Emmanuel quickly, points-wise, his line's at 16.5, but he usually goes under. He's got under 6 out of his last 10 in head-to-head matchups. So he hasn't versed the Brooklyn Nets since he moved to the Raptors. Looking at his assist prop, though, his line's at 6.5. You can get that for plus money. The matchup, it's a difficult one. The Nets allow the 6th fewest assists to point guards on the season, and Quickly's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. Ben Simmons. Having a look at Simo. His line's at 7.5. In terms of the matchup, Raptors allow the 7th fewest points to power forwards. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 5. So if you're going to bet on Ben Simmons, it wouldn't be in the points category anyway. You'd be looking at his rebounds and assists. So let's check the matchup there. The Raptors allow the 12th fewest rebounds to power forwards on the season. His line is only at 5.5, though. He's hit this in 3 out of his last 5 games. Assist-wise, his line is at 5.5. Minus 135, though. The matchup's not good nor bad, but he's hit this in 2 out of his last 5. So the matchup doesn't indicate that he's going to go off. So I'd prefer to avoid Ben Simmons. We're not going to go through Grady over here because the only reason I would look at his prop is to say his name, and that's a little bit childish, so I won't be doing that. Let's have a look at RJ Barrett. Points props at 20.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Brooklyn Nets do allow the 2nd most points to small forwards on the season. So it's a great matchup for RJ Barrett. He's yet to play the Nets in a Raptors uniform, but points prop definitely could be one. The matchup is great. His form is pretty good too. So I don't mind that. Minus 115 makes me a little bit hesitant. But looking at his rebounds as well, we know he's been doing that quite well this year. Lines at 16.5 for plus money. The Raptors do allow the most rebounds to small forwards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games.
So if we want to look at his points and his rebound prop, the line's at 26.5. He's hit that in 6 out of his last 10 games. The games where he's gone under, you can see the Spurs, the Cavaliers, the Rockets, and the Bulls. I think the Spurs is the only easy matchup out of those 4 games where he's gone under. So, and in that game against the Spurs, he only played 24 minutes. And they got blown out by 23 points. So, provided there's no blowout here and the game does stay close, RJ Barrett, points and rebounds, I don't mind that at all. I think that's definitely a lean. Let's have a look at Scotty Barnes. Scotty Barnes, his points props at 21.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. The Brooklyn Nets allow the fewest points to power forwards this season. Scotty Barnes has covered this in 1 of his last 4 games, so leading to the under for sure on his points prop. Looking at assists, the line's at 6.5. He's covered this in 4 straight and 7 out of his last 10. The Nets allow the 6th fewest assists to power forwards, and he's gone under in 4 consecutive games against the Nets. Looking at his rebounds, he's covered this in 4 consecutive games and covered it well. Prior to that, went under in 6 straight games. In head-to-head matchups against the Brooklyn Nets, he's covered it twice out of his last 4 games. So Scotty Barnes, I haven't bet Scotty Barnes much at all over the last 2 months. He's been rather inconsistent, but also his lines have been very high. So not a big fan of Scotty Barnes. Realistically, looking at this whole game, I'm not a fan of anything in this Nets v Raptors game. So let's jump into the next one. We're looking at the Phoenix Suns versus the Dallas Mavericks. So having a look at the players that are available, it looks like everybody's going to be playing. Let's have a look at Yusuf Nurkic. Quick look at the injuries. Bradley Beal's a game time decision. Luka, game time. Kleber and Derek Lively, game time decisions as well. Yusuf Nurkic, checking out his points prop first. Line is at 10.5 points. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Dallas somewhat small at the center position, but surprisingly, they defend centers quite well. They allow the 12th fewest points to centers on the season. So Yusuf Nurkic, 4 out of his last 10. That's not great. And his last matchup against the Mavericks, he only had 8 points. Rebound-wise, his line's at 9.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. He only had 5 rebounds in his last matchup against the Dallas Mavericks. Assist-wise, we know Nurkic can get assists. His line's at 3.5. He had 3 assists in his last game against the Mavs. And he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. So you see a lot of players with lines just like this. They go up, they go down. So it really requires something strong in the matchup or in a motivation or something in order to take the over for players who tend to fluctuate that way. So Yusuf Nurkic, a little bit hard to read right now. Let's have a look at Bradley Beal. He is a game time decision, but let's check him out. Points-wise, his line's at 17.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. In terms of the matchup, the Mavericks allow the 4th most points to shooting guards on the season. So the matchup is good. He scored 20 points the last time they play each other in the back end of January. Looking at his assists, his line's at 4.5, which is covered in 7 out of his last 10. The Mavs allow the 9th most assists to shooting guards on the season. And his last game against Dallas, he recorded 7 assists. Looking at his rebound prop, that line's at 3.5. He's covered that in 7 out of his last 10. The Mavericks allow the third most rebounds to shooting guards on the season too. And his last matchup against the Mavs, 7 rebounds. So what I'm thinking here is, one, I don't like his points, right? Very inconsistent. He's obviously a game time decision as well. But we do, not we, because I'm not speaking on behalf of all of you, on behalf of myself, I don't mind his rebounds and assist prop. So his line would be 8.5. It is minus 120 though, but he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. And in his last game against the Mavs, he finished on 14. So what I'm going to do is I'll have this as a lean at the moment because I don't want to play minus 120 odds. But when alternate lines are available, I may look at Bradley Beal over 9.5 rebounds and assists. Obviously, if he plays, if I can get that at plus money, then that's something that I'd look at. 9.5 rebounds and assists. Having a look at KD. Kevin Durant, his line is at 26.5 points, which is covered in 5 out of his last 10. The matchup with the Mavericks is a good one. They do allow the 6th most points to power forwards on the season. Kevin Durant has struggled against the Mavericks this year, going under in both games this season, 12 and 16 points. Looking at his assist prop, the line is at 5.5. The Mavs allow the 6th most assists to power forwards. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. And he had 7 assists in both of his games against the Mavericks this year. So that I might be able to fuck with. Looking at his rebound prop, Line's at 6.5. The matchup's not good nor bad. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10, and he's covered it in 3 consecutive games against the Dallas Mavericks. So now that I know that I like his rebounds and assist prop, let's have a look at what rebounds and assists look like for KD. Now, the first thing that got my attention is that it's at plus money. If you get 12.5 for Kevin Durant and you get that for plus money, he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games, and he's hit this in both of his games against the Dallas Mavericks this year with 15 and 17. So he's actually cleared this quite easily. So I don't mind that. Kevin Durant, overs in rebounds and assists. That's a lean. So Kevin Durant's a lean. Bradley Beal's a lean. So depending on what happens to the lineup there, if Bradley Beal's out, Kevin Durant, I'll be all over that one. Let's have a look at Devin Booker. Now, I don't bet on Devin Booker because his lines are very high, and I feel like he usually goes under them, but let's check it out. His points props at 27.5. He's hit this in 4 out of 10 games. He's hit this in 8 out of 20 games, and he's hit this in 47% of games this year. In terms of the matchup, the Mavs allow the 7th fewest points to point guards, but we do know that Devin Booker has this, not a feud, because they're somewhat nice to each other. He's in competition with Luka Doncic. He scored 46 points the last time he versed the Mavs, and then 20 points prior to that. So I can't tell you what he does on the scoring front. In terms of assists, well, if he's not scoring, he's going to be racking up the assists. So you see the polar opposite in these graphs. So that's why I'm not betting on anything related to Devin Booker. Let's check out Kyrie Irving. Didn't play in the All-Star break, so he's hopefully feeling fresh. His line's at 25.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Scored 30 points last matchup against the Phoenix Suns, which was in June last year. So it's been quite some time. Looking at his assist prop, 5.5 is his assist prop. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup is great. The Suns allow the 4th most assists to shooting guards. He had 7 assists in his last matchup against the Suns. Looking at his rebound prop, his line's at 4.5. He's hit this in 9 out of his last 10. The matchup is great because the Suns give up the 5th most rebounds to shooting guards. And in his last matchup against the Suns, he finished on 4. So I do like Kyrie's rebound and assist prop here. Jeez, that's 3 players in the same game where I like their rebounds and assists. Well, Kyrie's hit this in 8 out of his last 10 games. And check this out. He's hit this in 14 of his last 20 games. But over his last 16 games, he's hit this 14 times. So 14 out of his last 16 games, Kyrie's covered his rebounds and assist prop. Looking at the matchup, his rebounds and assist prop is delightful. So 10.5. I don't know. I'm looking at whether it was at 11.5 we'd get plus money, but suddenly that drops to 10 out of his last 16 games. But the 10.5 I do like because he's finished on 11 quite a few times, but I don't mind that for Kyrie. The odds aren't the best, but look, I'm probably a little bit biased. Kyrie is one of my favorite players. But Kyrie, rebounds and assists, check that out as well. So checking out Luka Doncic here. His line's at 31.5 points. The Phoenix Suns allow the 8th most points to point guards on the season. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And in head-to-head matchups, he's hit this in 5 of his last 6 games against the Phoenix Suns. He scored 50 and 34 points against them this year. So Luka looking very good from a points perspective. Looking at his assists, his line's at 9.5, but that's minus 125. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. And he's only hit this in 1 of his last 6. So automatically I'm leaning overs in points, unders in assists for Luka. Looking at his rebounds, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. The 3 games he went under, he finished with 8 rebounds. So that must be frustrating. The matchup's not the best, but Luka's a lot bigger than your ordinary point guard. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 2 out of his last 6. He went under in his rebound prop in both of his games this season. So I like the over in his points. I don't like his assists and rebounds very much at all for Luka Doncic. Checking to see if there's anyone else that catches my attention within this game. I want to have a quick look at PJ Washington, see how he's gone since he joined the Mavs. And looking at his recent games, not very well at all. So let's jump into the next game. So we're jumping into the Boston Celtics versus the Chicago Bulls. Quick one on injuries. Zach LaVine's still out. Lonzo's still out. Jaden Springer is a game-time decision. So all teams lining up as expected. Kicking it off with DeMar DeRozan. Now, his recent form is great. His line's at 23.5. He's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games, and he's hit this in 6 consecutive games. In head-to-head matchups, he has gone under in 2 consecutive games against the Celtics. Prior to that, he covered in 3 straight. So I don't bet on DeMar DeRozan much at all. He has been quite consistent. So if you have been betting on him, good on you. I personally never touch him. I don't like the way he plays. His effort on defense is a bit lax, and he's not aggressive looking for his shot. So I can't seem to find the courage to take him despite his recent form. But looking at his assists, over his last 10, he's covered his line of 4.5 7 times. Against the Boston Celtics, he's covered this 3 out of his last 5. Rebound-wise, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 10. And against the Boston Celtics, 2 out of his last 5. So points and assists for DeMar DeRozan, I wouldn't say is such a bad play. I'm not going to take it. I promise you that. But points and assist lines, 28.5. He's hit that in 8 of his last 10 games, including 6 straight. And in head-to-head matchups, he has gone under in his last 2. So I don't know. Does he find it difficult against Boston? Or was his form at this point in the season, was it down? So that's something worth investigating. But DeMar DeRozan, not for me. Having a look at Nikola Vucevic, his points line is at 18.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. And looking at the matchup, the Celtics are in the middle of the league in points allowed to centers for the season. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 2 out of his last 5 games against the Boston Celtics. I'd probably lean to the over, but with zero confidence whatsoever. Looking at his rebound prop, his line's at 11.5. It is plus 100 odds, which is good, but he's only hit this in 3 out of his last 10. And the Boston Celtics allow the second fewest rebounds to centers on the season. But when he's played against the Celtics, he's covered in 4 out of his last 5. So a lot of contradicting data. And Nikola Vucevic, not a player that I do like to bet on often, if anything at all. So that's not for me. But having a look at Kristaps Porzingis. Now, I do like the occasional dabble on Kristaps Porzingis, obviously depending on the matchup and everything like that. But his points line is at 19.5. The Bulls allow the 10th fewest points to centers on the 6 out of his last 10, and he's yet to verse the Bulls in a Boston Celtics uniform. So this would be interesting. I honestly would lean to the under on this one, but again, with no confidence. I think if this was 17.5, probably would take it, but 19.5, I'd probably look at the under. But again, no confidence whatsoever. Looking at his rebound line, it is at 7.5, which is hitting 5 out of his last 10. But the Bulls do allow the 8th fewest rebounds to centers on the season. So somewhat difficult matchup. Probably not. A part of the reason why a lot of these matchups are going to say that they allow the least is because the Bulls just play really slow. Very slow pace, which means it's hard to get points and rebounds against them. Having a look at Jaylen Brown, one of the most disappointing dunk contest entrants I have ever seen. And I only seen the highlights. I imagine if I watched that whole thing, I would have thrown up in my mouth. But what do we got here? Looking at his points prop, it's at 19.5. Minus 120 if you choose to take the over. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup's not good nor bad. And against the Bulls, he's hit this in 3 out of 5. So every second game, he seems to go over and under. Based off this trend, he's going to go under. Other than that, I wouldn't be betting on Jaylen Brown's points in this game. Looking at his rebounds, he does have a decent stretch. Well, he had a decent stretch. But he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. Lines at 5.5. Bulls allow the 10th fewest rebounds to small forwards on the season. Head-to-head, very much like his points, every second game he tends to go over, which means he's due for an under. I'm not saying bet the under. What I'm saying is don't bet on Jaylen Brown. So I shan't be touching Jaylen Brown. Who's someone that I do want to bet on, though? Kobe White's an interesting one, but so is Drew Holiday. So let's have a look at Drew Holiday first. Points-wise, his line's at 12.5, and you can get that for plus 100. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. The Bulls allow the fewest points to point guards this season. So I don't like that. In head-to-head matchups, he did score 14 points in his last matchup against the Chicago Bulls, but I wouldn't be confident in taking his points prop again. What I don't mind is his assist prop. Now, let's check this out. The Bulls they're in the middle, 14th they rank in assists allowed to point guards this season. Now, Drew Holiday over his last 10 has hit this 6 times, but he has hit this in 4 consecutive games. He had 9 assists in his last matchup against the Bulls. Now, that's not strong at these odds, minus 145. I will not be taking that bet. But one bet that I will be taking for Drew Holiday is his assists in the first quarter for many reasons. First reason, check this out. He's hit it in 7 consecutive games. He's got more than 2 assists in the first quarter. He had 3 assists in the first quarter when they last versed the Chicago Bulls. And my favorite thing about this bet is that you can get it at plus money. It's plus 140 for something that he's done 7 times in a row against a team that he's done it against before. Give me that. Drew Holiday, over 1.5 assists in the first quarter. Let's go. Who else have we got? Kobe White. Now, looking at his individual, I think I saw something in one of the combined props. It wasn't an individual line, but let's just go through them each and maybe it'll be clear to me then. His points prop is at 21.5. So looking at his last 10, he's covered this in 5 of his last 10 games. The Boston Celtics, they do allow the 6th most points to point guards. Head-to-head matchups, he has struggled. He's gone under in 4 consecutive games against the Boston Celtics. Looking at his assist prop, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. And he's gone under in every game against the Celtics. Rebounds prop, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. And guess what? He's gone under in every game against the Celtics. So I think if we just look at his rebounds plus assists, I know there's a lot of players I've looked at rebounds plus assists. We can see that against the Celtics, he's struggled in 4 games. He only played 29 minutes in this last game. So that's the most minutes he played. So the other 3 games, you can pretty much get rid of them because he was playing a reduced role off the bench. Over his last 10 games, he's hit this rebounds and assist line 7 out of the 10, but he's averaging almost 40 minutes a night. So his minutes are definitely going to be up there. Matchup is good for rebounds. So maybe we just look at rebounds. The Celtics allow the 2nd most rebounds to point guards on the season. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. It's minus 125. So, yeah, I think there's good trend lines, good matchups for Kobe White, but the odds aren't great. And I wouldn't have the courage to take this at 5.5 to get plus money. So, yeah, Kobe White's an interesting one, but I'm not interested. Looking at Jason Tatum, his points prop is at 26.5 points. Over his last 10 games, he's hit this 5 times. The matchup against power forwards for the Chicago Bulls is a great one. They allow the 6th most points to power forwards on the season. Jason Tatum has hit this in 3 out of his last 5 against the Chicago Bulls. So I'd lean to the over on this one, but I don't bet Jason Tatum very much at all. And that's because his prop lines, his points lines are close to 30 most nights, but his results are 30, 20, 30, 20. Like it's very inconsistent. So points prop, not a fan of. Assist prop, I have bet his assist prop a few times this season and check that out. His line's at 5.5 and you can get that for plus money. I'm not surprised to see that at plus money because his line is normally at 4.5. Sometimes it's at 3.5, but he's been performing quite well in this area. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. In head-to-head matchups against the Bulls, he hit this in 3 out of his last 5. So, look, 4 assists for your parlays, same game parlays, that might be a good shout for Jason Tatum. But if you're looking for a full prop to take, I'm going to be taking his assist one in this one. Rebound-wise, I might be able to fuck with it. Line's at 8.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. The Bulls allow the most rebounds to power forwards. Jason Tatum has covered this line in 2 out of his last 5 against the Bulls, though. So the matchup might be great, but Tatum hasn't got it done against the Bulls on a consistent enough basis for me to take this. So given that, I think I'll pass on any bets on Jason Tatum. Other than that, there's nobody else in this game that's really screaming out to me. Derek White, it's not screaming out to me whatsoever. Andre Drummond, he quietly gets about his business, depending on the role and everything like that. We know matchup-wise, it's not good nor bad for points. He's hit his points line in 6 out of 10, but he's struggled against the Celtics. Let's check his rebounds out against the Celtics. Yeah, he's got under the last 2, both of those games of this season, so Drummond struggled. His rebound line is 9.5, and he comes off the bench. His last 10, he's only averaging 20 minutes a night. His line's at 9.5, but he has covered in 4 out of his last 5 games. But the matchup is difficult, but I also don't think he'll be playing whilst Kristaps Porzingis is on the court. I think they'll try to stagger them a little bit, and make something else happen. But yeah, not too much happening in this game that I love outside of Drew Holiday. That first quarter props really got my attention. DeMar DeRozan, great recent form. I personally just don't like him. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, just very inconsistent in their own right. So I usually tend to avoid them. Let's jump into the next one. All right, we're taking a look at the Los Angeles Clippers versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that's a great game. I can't wait to watch this one. Actually, I'm going to have to wait to watch it because I'm going to be working tomorrow. There's no injuries to call out, so a lot of props are going to be available in this game. We're starting with James Harden. So his points line is at 16.5, which he's covered in 6 out of his last 10. The Thunder allow the 13th most points to point guards on the season. In head-to-head matchups, he scored 23 and 16 in the 2 games against them this season. So no strong lean on his points prop at the moment for James Harden. Looking at his assist prop, lines at 8.5, and you can get plus money. Who would have ever thought that about James Harden? Now, he has gone under in 4 straight. He's only hit in 3 out of his last 10. The matchup with the Thunder is a good one. Thunder allow the 10th most assists to point guards on the season, so I don't mind that. But James Harden's assist numbers have been down as of late, and you'd really have to watch some film to understand why, or at the very least, look at his potential assists. So if over this 4-game stretch where he's gone under in his assist prop, provided he's getting, 16 potential assists, I'd consider taking the over. But if those potential assist numbers are 12, 13, 14, then I wouldn't have any confidence taking the over for James Harden. Sorry. His rebound prop lines at 4.5, but that's at minus 142. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10, and the Thunder allow the 3rd most rebounds to point guards. James Harden's had 9 and 5 rebounds in the 2 games up against OKC this season. So what I'd be interested to look at here is the Clippers are on the road. I wonder what his last 10 road games look like. And there it is. So 7 out of his last 10 road games, or 7 out of his last 8, really, if you want to make it sway. And in those games that he has covered, the lowest number of rebounds he's had is 7. So what I would be interested in, given that, the matchup and stuff, I would actually be looking to take James Harden. If I was going to bet this, I'd take him over 5.5 to get the plus money. Plus 120. I think that's well worth the bet. If you hit the 4.5, you're not making much profit on that anyway. I'd risk it. Take James Harden over 5.5. That's a lean from me. I'm not saying to take it, but if I was to take a James Harden prop, it would definitely be this one. James Harden over 5.5 rebounds. Let's stick with the Clippers players. Then we'll get to OKC. My man, Russell Westbrook. His points prop is at 10.5 points, which is hitting 6 out of his last 10. Against his old team, the OKC Thunder, he's covered this line in 4 consecutive games. In his last game against them, he played 22.4 minutes. These days, he's averaging 23 minutes a night over his last 10 games. So Westbrook up against the OKC Thunder. 10.5 points. I could see him covering that. The odds aren't bad, minus 110. Let's have a look at his assist prop. His line's at 3.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10, and he's covered it in 3 straight against the OKC Thunder. And if we're looking at his rebound prop, his line's at 4.5. It's plus money, but he's hitting 2 out of his last 10 games. We know the matchup is good because we just went through James Harden's matchup. In head-to-head, it's been inconsistent. 8, 2, 13, and 2. So as much as I love Russ, I wouldn't confidently take his picks. If I had to, it would probably be his points prop, which gets me a little bit aroused. Looking at Zubac. Now, I wonder if Zubac's playing his full complement of minutes because prior to the All-Star break, he was a little bit inconsistent. You can see it here. First game against Memphis, then he just started about 20 minutes a night, then played 27.8 minutes against the Golden State Warriors. So line at 9.5, potentially 10.5. If he's playing his full complement of minutes, I don't mind him to score 10 points. I can see that happening. Up against Chet Holmgren, he's only scored 6 points in both games against the Thunder, though, so that would make me a little bit hesitant. Let's have a look at his rebounds prop. It's at 8.5. minus 135 odds. He's hit 5 out of his last 10. Great matchup. Thunder given the 4th most rebounds to centers on the season, but Zubac has covered in 1 of 2 games this year against them. 10 rebounds, followed up by 3. So, you don't give me any confidence in you. Sorry about it. Paul George. Naturally, when I see Paul George, I think under, because he has been quite disappointing as of late. But let's check this out. Points prop. Line is at 21.5 points. He's gone under 8 of his last 10 games. The matchup is a difficult one. The Thunder allow the fewest points to small forwards on the season. And out of these 2 games where we went over, Detroit, absolute trash. He actually came up pretty clutch and pretty big in that game. And then he scored 24 points against the Golden State Warriors, but keep in mind Kawhi Leonard wasn't in that game. So Paul George didn't even cover his points line in that game, despite scoring 24 points. So definite lean on Paul George unders in this game. Checking to see if I wrote down any other notes. I'm actually leaning his whole PRA under 30.5. So let's have a look at his assist prop. His line's at 3.5. You can get that for plus 120. And I have been taking overs in Paul George's assist prop. Difficult matchup here. The Thunder allow the second fewest assists to small forwards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. He's gone over in his last 3 games against OKC. Now, looking at his rebound prop, that's not rebounds. There it is. Rebound line is at 4.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. The Thunder allow the third fewest rebounds to small forwards. And Paul George has hit in 3 out of his last 4 against the OKC Thunder. So I think out of all the props, probably the points one is the one where I'd lead the under the most. So under 22.5, yeah, I might take that. 21.5, I'd take that too. So the matchups is a difficult one. Look, it's just a lean at the moment, but yeah, definitely for PG, leaning the under in his points, that's for sure. Let's have a look at Kawhi Leonard before we look at SGA. So the Claw, his point sign's at 24.5. It's plus 100 odds. I like that. Now, he has gone under in 3 straight. Hasn't played in 9 or 10 days. All-star break, but also an injury or rest, depending on how you see it. Head-to-head matchups, he's gone over 1 of his last 3 against OKC. Scored 16 points against them in their most recent matchup. Against power forwards, Oklahoma City Thunder allow the 9th fewest points. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 5.5, which is hit in 6 out of his last 10. The matchup's not good nor bad. And he's had 6 rebounds in 3 straight games against OKC. But at minus 119, I'm not so interested in taking Kawhi Leonard for that. So let's have a look at these OKC Thunder players. The first one, Jalen Williams. J-Dub. His points props at 19.5. He's off the back of 2 consecutive 30-point games. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Clippers, they do allow the 5th fewest points to power forwards, though. And J-Dub did score 25 in his last matchup against the Clippers, but he's gone under in 2 out of 4. Looking at his rebound prop, his line's at 3.5, but that's at minus 135. The matchup is good. The Clippers allow the 8th most rebounds to power forwards on the season, but J-Dub has hit this in 2 out of 4 games against them. Looking at his assist prop, that line's at 4.5. You can get that for plus 100. Clippers allow the 10th most assists to power forwards on the season. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. And against the Clippers, he's hit this in 2 straight. 7 assists in each game this season. And last season, he had 4 and 3. So I think assists out of all these picks, probably the one that I'll be leaning on the most. But yeah, nothing screaming out to me so far in this game, if I must say. Some, probably James Harden. Josh Giddey. No one bets on Josh Giddey anymore. So we can go straight past him. Let's have a look at SGA. So, once upon a time, he played for the Clippers. I feel like it was that long ago. There's no revenge part of his mindset. Correct me if I'm wrong. But his line's at 30.5. 30.5. In his last 10, he's covered this 7 times. 7 out of his last 10 games, he's gone over this points line. The Clippers allow the 13th most points to point guards on the season. And SGA has covered this in 3 out of his last 6 games against them. So, points-wise, that's not screaming out to me. Assist-wise, his line is at 6.5. You can get that for plus money. He's hit that in 5 out of his last 10, but the Clippers allow the 9th fewest assists to point guards. And SGA has gone under this in 5 straight games against the Los Angeles Clippers. So, what I would be thinking is taking the under in his points and assists. For some reason, well, he's gone over it in 4 out of his last 10. So I'm leaning the under because he's gone under in 6 out of his last 10. He's also gone under in 5 consecutive games against the Clippers. So leaning the under on that one. I'm not saying to take it, but yeah, that's what my gut says. So let's have a look at Chet Holmgren. Now, Chet's points line is at 14.5. He has gone under in 3 straight, and he's covered in 5 of his last 10. The LA Clippers allow the fewest points to centers on the season, and I think he's hit this in 1 of 2. That's right, 23 points, followed up by 8 points for Chet Holmgren. Looking at his rebound prop in this one, the line is at 7.5. When you can get that for plus money, he's hit that in 6 out of his last 10. The Clippers do allow the 4th fewest rebounds to centers, but Chet's gone under in both of his games against the Clippers this year. 6 rebounds and 5 rebounds. And no surprise, we see plus money at 7.5. So for Chet, I wouldn't feel comfortable taking that one either. So going through this game, I'd probably say James Harden rebounds I'm most confident in from this game, and under in Paul George points are probably the 2 ones that are singing to me, followed by maybe Westbrook over in points, SGA under in assists. But Let's jump into the next game. There's still plenty more to go. So we're looking at the Houston Rockets versus the New Orleans Pelicans. So let's jump into Dylan Brooks. Firstly, let's check the injuries in this game. Firstly, what do we know? Reggie Bullock is a game time decision, but so is Brandon Ingram. So that's pretty big news. Dylan Brooks, though, his point signs at 13.5. He's hit this in 5 straight games and in 7 out of his last 10. In terms of the matchup, the Pelicans allow the 4th fewest points to small forwards on the season. Head-to-head wise, Dylan Brooks has gone under in 3 consecutive games against the Pelicans. So that leaves me a little bit hesitant to take his points prop, despite the strong form he's been in as of late. He's never got it done against the Pels in a Rockets jersey, and the matchup is somewhat difficult. So I'd be a bit hesitant to take that. Brandon Ingram, so his game time decision for this game, but if he does play, I might as well arm you with some information. His points prop is at 20.5. You get that for minus 118. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The Houston Rockets are now the 10th fewest points of shooting guards on the season. And Brandon Ingram has covered this line in 4 out of his last 6. So Brandon Ingram, I don't bet on him much at all. I'm very much like DeRozan. He can be in a game, but still not get the assists that I think he should be getting. I'm not a big fan of his when it comes to betting. As a basketball purist, I love the way Brandon Ingram plays. But if you're betting him to get some stats, oh, hell nah. Let's check his assist line. His line is at 6.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup is a difficult one, but in head-to-head matchups, Brandon Ingram has still gone under. He's only hit this in 1 of 6 games against them. So BI, not a big fan of that. Let's have a look at Alperen Sengun. So Sengun's points line is at 19.5. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10 games. But the Pelicans, this is their weak spot. It's where they allow points. 11th most points to centers for the season. In head-to-head matchups, Sengun's covered this in 2 out of his last 7. He's played them 3 times this year, scoring 24, 37, but then only 10 points. So, yeah, not a big fan of betting on this bloke right now. His assist line's at 4.5, but that's minus 140. The Pels do allow the 2nd most assists to centers on the season. So I think at 5.5, if you can get pretty close to plus money, that might be worth playing. But head-to-head matchups, he has hit in his last 2. But I can't take this with too much confidence. Let me just check the line, the odds. Yeah. Plus 128 if you take the 5.5, but then he's only hit that in 2 of 7 games against them, but he has hit that in 6 out of his last 10. So, yeah, I don't mind Sengun there, but definitely much better players on the board, more players that I'm more confident in. Looking at his rebound prop, lines at 8.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. The Pels allow the 7th most rebounds to centers. Sengun's hit this in his last 2 against them. So, I can't tell you which he's going to hit, but I can tell you that he's hit his props against his team for points, rebounds, and assists before. It's a little bit difficult predicting which one he gets in this one. Van Vliet, let's check him out. I'm not sure how many games he's played off the back of his injury. I don't think he has. His last game was on the 5th of February against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So his line's at 13.5. Could be on some sort of minutes restriction. I'm not too sure. So I don't think Fred Van Vliet is worth previewing right now. Cam Whitmore, I do want to look at his purely because his form as of late has been pretty good. So his point sign is 11.5. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games, which is pretty good. He's versed the Pelicans once. He scored 17 points in only 20 minutes. So, and in that game, the Rockets lost by 11 points. So Rockets lose by 11. Whitmore plays 20 minutes and he scores 17 points. Looking at his last 10 games, he's playing about 20 minutes a night. So if he's playing 20 minutes a night, in that game against the Pelicans, he took 12 shots. He shot 6 from 12, averaging 12.5 shot attempts per game. So that 12 shot attempt game against the Pelicans wasn't an outlier. That's pretty much what you can expect him to produce. So if he's shooting the ball 12 times, based on what we're seeing, he's more than likely to cover this 11.5. So I would lean the over. Odds are at minus 115. And if I'm going to take a bet at that odd, I must be pretty bloody confident. I'm not. So this is probably a lean for Cam Whitmore at the moment. But yeah, he's been playing great. I don't mind it at all. Who else is there? Let's have a look at Jalen Green. So, sweet Jalen Green, his points line is at 16.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. Pelicans, great matchup here. They allow the third most points to shooting guards on the season. Now, Jalen Green, inconsistent as hell. But against this Pelicans team, he's done quite well. He's covered in 5 out of his last 7. 3 games against them this season. 25, 9 points, and then 31 points. The 9-point game was on the road. And in this game, just happens to be a road game too. So the matchup is good, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him go under. But I'm not man enough to take that bet right now. Let's have a look at Jabari Smith Jr. I haven't bet on this guy for a few months, but let's see if there's anything worth taking. So his points prop is at 12.5. The Pelicans allow the 4th fewest points to power forwards. He has hit in 4 of his last 10. He scored 0 points in his last matchup against the Pels. He played 21 minutes. The game prior to that, he scored 26 points and played 37 minutes. So, what do you make of that? What that tells me is don't bet on him because you don't know what the hell's going on. Rebound-wise, he had 11 rebounds in that high-scoring game and then 1 rebound in the low-scoring game. In his last 10, he's hit this 6 out of his 10 games to cover his line of 7.5. But the odds are a bit juiced. Minus 135. No, thank you. Who else have we got? Jonas Valanciunas. Let's have a look at you, Jonas. So his points props at 11.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is a difficult one against the Houston Rockets. In his head-to-head matchups, he's done quite well. He's covered in 5 out of his last 7 games against Houston. And then at the start of February, he scored 25 points against the Houston Rockets in an 11-point win. That was a road game for the Pels. So they're back at home. The last time he versed them at home, he only scored 10 points. So that's quite interesting. Looking at his rebound prop, his line's at 9.5, which is covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head wise, he's covered that in 5 out of his last 7. Last home game against the Rockets, he had 11 boards. So, look, Jonas to get boards, I can see that happening. 9.5 at plus money. Form against his opponent, great. Last 10, nah, I don't like it. I do not like it. Let's talk about the skinny boy, Zion Williamson. So his points prop is at 24.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. The Rockets allow the 8th most points to power forwards on the season. So 4 out of his last 10, he scored 28 points in his last game against the Rockets, 24 points in his last road game against the Rockets, and then 26 points earlier this year. So he has a good matchup, and he scored quite well against them in the past. The 24.5 is a bit of a stretch, but look, at plus 100, I think that's fair. Honestly, I do. So I don't hate that. I think the line is pretty much bang on, but you're also getting fair odds, in my personal opinion. So I don't mind that for Zion Williamson. I didn't look at his rebounds or assists because I know that he ain't doing nothing in those areas. Let's have a look at CJ McCollum. So his points prop, depending on which one you take, is 18.5 or 17.5. Let's look at the 17.5 minus 125. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The matchup against the Houston Rockets is a tough one. They allow the 5th fewest points to point guards on the season. CJ McCollum has covered in 3 of his last 6 games against them. He scored 19 and 13 points in the 2 games that he played against the Rockets this year. Looking at his assist prop, I know he had a long stretch of going under. Started to find a bit of form, but 2 of his last 10 he's covered in. The Rockets allow the fewest assists to point guards on the season. And in head-to-head matchups, he's gone under both of his games against the Houston Rockets this year. So, yeah, definitely leaning to the under on this one for CJ, but I think there are better plays out there. So outside of reflecting back on this game, what am I thinking? I'm thinking I'm not going to bet on this game, to be honest. Zion to go over in points is not bad. I could just find too many reasons not to pick the others. So I think that next game, though, the Charlotte Hornets versus Utah Jazz, I think there's a bit of value in this game. I can smell it. But let's jump into it and let's have a look. Okay, it's a Charlotte Hornets versus the Utah Jazz. Checking the injuries first because these injuries are quite impactful. We know LaMelo Ball is out, Mark Williams is out, and Otto Porter is out for the Utah Jazz. Checking out Chris Dunn real quick because his point line's at 6.5. He's hit that in 6 out of his last 10 games. In terms of the matchup, difficult one. The Hornets allow the 10th fewest points to point guards, but I really just wanted to check his assist prop out. It's at 3.5. He has hit this in 5 out of his last 10, but he's gone under in 4 straight. Has a good matchup. The Hornets allow the 8th most assists to point guards on the season, but I'm not interested in playing that for Chris Dunn. Let's have a look at Lauri Markkanen. Points prop is at 23.5 points for King Lauri Markkanen. 22.5, which he's hit in 3 out of his last 10 games. The Hornets, pretty good defensively against power forwards, ranking 13th on the season. Given that, I'd probably lean to the under on this at the moment. Head-to-head form, he's gone over in 2 of his last 3. Scored 33 points in his last game against the Charlotte Hornets. So I wouldn't bet the under, but I'm not overconfident in betting the over either. Looking at his rebounds prop, the line for Lauri is at 8.5, minus 128. He's hitting 5 out of his last 10 games. Hornets allow the 5th fewest rebounds to power forwards. And in his last 3 games, Lauri's covered this in every single game. 11, 13, and 12. So that's quite interesting. Do you want to back his form against his opponent? Because that's quite compelling. Or does the matchup being difficult sway you the other way? Or does this inconsistent form over his last 10 games make you say, fuck it, I'm just not going to bet on Lauri Markkanen at all? Because that's what I'm going to do. I ain't betting on him. Nuh-uh. Who else is there for the Utah Jazz? Jordan Clarkson. So I've been leaning his under for quite some time, which has been delivering. I'm not betting it, but I have been leaning that way. And what I was looking at, and this is what I normally lean on, under in his points and rebounds. So check this out. His line's at 19.5. He's hit this at only 2 out of his last 10. The matchup is good for points and rebounds, though. So, sorry, my bad. I take that back. The matchup is difficult for points, but it's good for rebounds. And in head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in both of them against the Charlotte Hornets for Jordan Clarkson. So that's one of the leans that I have in this game. Haven't taken a play on it yet. Colin Sexton, I don't think I feel like betting an over on him. I think the lines are probably quite sharp on Colin, but let's have a look. His line's at 19.5, which is hit in 5 of his last 10 games. The matchup, difficult one. Charlotte Hornets allow the 7th fewest points to shooting guards. In head-to-head matchups, he did score 24 points in his last matchup against the Charlotte Hornets. But, yeah, I don't feel confident in betting that. In terms of his assists, his line's at 6.5. The Hornets allow the 8th most assists to shooting guards on the year. 5 of his last 10. And he had 13 assists against the Charlotte Hornets last time. So, look, he's quite inconsistent. Points and assists is probably the way to go, but 6 out of his last 10. 37 against them last time. I feel like the lines are really starting to sharpen up in Colin Sexton, so I'm not interested in that. Who else is there? Cody Martin. I think I've got a bet on Cody Martin already. Let me just double check. I do. So, my play on Cody Martin is not on his points. My play on Cody Martin is on his rebounds. Yep, they're on his rebounds. So, checking Cody Martin here. His line is 4.5, and it's at plus money. I love that. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. He's hit this in 5 consecutive games. And against the Utah Jazz, only 3 weeks ago, he had 7 rebounds and he only played 29.4 minutes. In his last 10 games, he's pretty much averaging 27 minutes per game. So I don't mind the thought of getting him to get over 4.5 rebounds at plus money because he's hitting that at a 70% hit rate over his last 10. And he's done it quite well against this team in the past. So I think I was quick to jump on that. Got on it nice and early, but I've noticed the odds are starting to come back a little bit. What else have I bet on in this game? It wasn't Miles Bridges, I'll tell you that. Let me explain. So his points line is at 22.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. In terms of the matchup, the Jazz do allow the most points to power forwards on the season. So he's got a great matchup. In head-to-heads, he scored 21 points against the Utah Jazz. So Miles Bridges, I'd bet the under if I had to, but it's sports betting. You don't have to bet on anything, right? You bet on what you're confident on betting on. Let me tell you. Brandon Miller, his points prop is at 20.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. Matchup, someone decent for Brandon Miller. Against the Utah Jazz, he scored 12 points last time. He played 37 minutes, shot the ball 18 times, 0 for 7 from downtown. Volume was good, but he couldn't make a bucket. So Brandon Miller, I'm not too interested in betting on him. Who I have bet on is Trey Mann. So it's not his points prop because that line's starting to move into a place where I'm a little bit uncomfortable to play it. We've only got a small sample size of data, 4 games since he's moved to the Charlotte Hornets, and he's playing a lot more minutes. Ultimately, the pick that I did choose is his rebounds and assists. I got him over 10.5. Over 10.5, minus 110. And look at that. The 4 games since he joined the Charlotte Hornets, 11, 13, 16, and 14. This game where he had 11, that's 4 assists and 7 rebounds, I'm pretty sure he only played like 20 minutes. Yep. 17.8 minutes, is that right? Yeah. 17.8 minutes. Oh, actually, he was still in OKC here. What am I talking about? Here it is. That's his first game for Charlotte against the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, in that particular game, 27, 33, 29 minutes in his last 3 games. And check it out. 13, 16, and 14. Individually, he's had 2 great games where he's had excellent rebound numbers, assist numbers, and in his first game, strong on the assists, somewhat decent on the rebounds. So I think the best way to play it is to take both rebounds and assists, because hopefully he can give you both. In terms of the matchup, the rebounds are more difficult, the assist, an easy matchup, but we've seen easy matchups in the past still not go away, but I like the idea of combining the rebounds and assists. If you haven't got the theme of this video already, I think it's like the 4th or 5th player I've mentioned that. Having a look at John Collins, though. So he was someone I bet on quite regularly, but that was back when his line was like 11.5. It's now at 14.5. So let's have a look. Let's see what's going on here. At 14.5, you get it at minus 110. He's hitting 7 of his last 10 games. The matchup is great. The Hornets allow the 3rd most points to centers this season. John Collins scored 20 points against them only 3 weeks ago. John Collins, I don't mind that. Shit. Let's check his rebounds out. Rebounds, lines at 9.5. That's also plus money. The Hornets allow the 5th most rebounds to centers on the season. 10 rebounds in his last game against them. I think what you've really got to worry about here with John Collins, check the lineups, because he's been playing less center and more power forward as of late. I know Walker Kessler's starting to get a little bit more minutes too. So, yeah, John Collins, numbers look great. His form against the team is great, but I know that there has been some sort of lineup changes. So look at Walker Kessler real quick, because he's going to take full advantage of that matchup, you would assume. Line's at 9.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And you can see it here. His last 4 games, his minutes have started to lift up. So he's playing more minutes. John Collins isn't playing less. John Collins is just playing more time at the 4. And Larry Markkinen is playing more time at the 3. So they're actually gone quite big. Walker Kessler covering in 6 of his last 10. And look at that. Against the Hornets, 10 points in only 16 minutes the last time they played each other. I do like his points prop in this one. The more that I look at it, the odds, not the greatest thing for me, but maybe we can combine it with something else. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 7.5. 4 rebounds against the Hornets last time in 16 minutes. If he plays 25 minutes the way I think he should, we can probably expect to see something in between this and this, which is 9 rebounds and 16 rebounds. So he should get about 10. Line's at 7.5. Yeah, I don't mind that. Looking at his last 10 games, he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10, but he has been quite close. So what I'm thinking is points and rebounds for Walker Kessler. It's just a thought. I'm not telling anyone to do it, but just thinking out loud here. Minus 120, though. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. So if we're looking at it, even points, the odds for that aren't great. I wouldn't take it at 10.5 either. So Walker Kessler I'm going to have to pass on, but he might have a massive game tomorrow because the matchup is perfect for him. And other than that, I don't think there's anybody else in this game that's got me thinking. So, look, Trey Mann, rebounds and assists, I do like the most. Cody Martin, rebounds, I think that's a good pick. Jordan Clarkson, unders. I'm leaning that at the moment, and there's a lot of players I would choose not to play. But yeah, those are just some of my leans and my bets right now. Let's jump into the Washington Wizards versus the Denver Nuggets. Starting with Tyus Jones. So this guy, I've got to lean on every single one of his props, and let me explain why. Before I do, just let me talk through some injuries at the moment. So KCP is a game time decision, as well as Jamal Murray, game time decision as well. Let's talk about Tyus Jones for a minute, because you're going to see a lot of green on here. His points prop is at 13.5. It's at plus money, and he's hit this in 6 consecutive games. I'm leaning the over. The matchup is a somewhat difficult one, but I'm not overly concerned with that because he scored 15 points in his last matchup against Denver. So still leaning the over, right? Now, if we check his assist prop, his line's at 7.5. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10, and he's hit that in 6 consecutive games. Up against the Denver Nuggets, he had 13 assists the last time they played, and that was only 3 to 4 weeks ago. So his assist prop is telling me the same thing as his points prop, and that is that he's been doing it quite well. And despite the matchup being difficult, he's done it against the Denver Nuggets before. So basically, if you're looking at his points and assists, it's at 20.5 minus 113. He's hit in 8 out of his last 10, and he's cleared it quite easily in his last 4. And against the Denver Nuggets, he had 28 points and assists. So 15 points and 13 assists. Matchup is difficult, so I'm definitely leaning on the over here. Absolutely leaning on the over. I'm just questioning why have they kept the line the way that it is, because he's been playing quite well, and he's done it well against the Denver Nuggets before, and maybe I'm overthinking it, but now I'm just unsure. So I don't know. If I haven't bet on it, let me know what your thoughts are on Tyus Jones. Have you looked into it? What are your thoughts and opinions on the matter? Also, we've got, stick with the Washington Wizards first. Denny Advia. Now, this guy's been scoring like a beast lately. Well, not lately, but prior to the All-Star break. Check that out. Cover this points line of 15.5 in 4 consecutive games, 5 out of his last 10. The matchup with the Nuggets is a difficult one, who allow the second fewest points to small forwards on the season. He scored 4 points the last time they played and hit this in 1 of his last 3. So that leaves me to be a little bit hesitant. But I think if he continues to do what he's doing, when he gets the right matchup, I'll be sure to take that. Assist-wise, his line's at 3.5, covering in 3 of his last 10, and 2 of his last 3 against the Nuggets. So Denny Advia, I'm not getting overly excited about that. Let's have a look at Jordan Poole real quick. His points line is at 13.5. He's hit this in 5 of his last 10. The matchup with the Nuggets is a difficult one. They allow the 5th fewest points to shooting guards. Head-to-head matchups, scored 4 points in his last game against the Denver Nuggets. So not man enough to take the over on Jordan Poole. Unless the other team's playing with 4 players and they leave Jordan Poole open all night, I'm not going to take it. But what I have taken with some success over the past couple of weeks is his assist prop. So his line's at 3.5. That's at plus money. Looking at his last 10, he's hit this in 6 of his last 10 games. So recent form, quite good passing the ball. And you're also getting it at plus money. The Nuggets allow the 7th fewest assists to shooting guards, though, so the matchup is somewhat difficult. I'm a little bit hesitant to take it, but if he does find a game with an easier matchup, same odds for the same line, definitely something I'd consider taking. Let's have a look at Marvin Bagley, and I don't want to look at his points prop. That's not his prerogative, even though he does a decent job. I want to look at his rebounds. So we took Marvin Bagley for 10 rebounds in his last matchup, I think against the Pelicans. We took that at plus money for sure. I think we lifted his line up. But his line in this game is at 7.5, and it's plus 110 odds. So plus money for 7.5. Matchup is difficult, though. The Nuggets allow the 7th fewest rebounds to centers on the season. Hit this in 6 out of his last 10. He had 7 rebounds in his last matchup against the Nuggets. But he got 7 rebounds, 5 of those being offensive, and he did it in 17 minutes. As a member of the Washington Wizards, over his last 5 games, he's playing 22 minutes on average, but his last 2 games, I think this is since the Gafford trade, 28 and 30 minutes per game. And in those games, what do you get? 13 and 10 rebounds. So in this one, Marvin Bagley, I'm leaning the over. I'm going to tell you right now. Marvin Bagley, let me write that down. I don't want to forget that. Leaning the over 7.5, and that's purely because you can get him at 7.5 rebounds for plus money. I don't mind that whatsoever. If you want to filter it down, and let's say if we only want to look at games where he's played more than 29 minutes, Marvin Bagley playing more than 29 minutes. In his last 20 games, he's hit this 12 out of 17. Last 10, 7 out of 10. So it's a pretty strong hit rate. The games he went under, Utah, Portland, and Houston. But these were when he was playing with Detroit. And he's played 3 games with the Washington Wizards where he played more than 29 minutes. And he's had rebound numbers of 11, 12, 10. His line in this one is 7.5. In terms of matchup, the Knicks is a difficult matchup, and he's killed it. The Spurs is an easy matchup, and he killed it. And the Pelicans, that's a difficult matchup too. but Marvin Bagley did well. So I do like his rebound prop in this one. Thank you, Outlier, because I would have missed that if I didn't double check. So that's a pretty good pick. Who else is there that we want to look at? Washington. Let's have a look at Kyle Kuzma. So Kyle Kuzma's points line is at 18.5. It's one of the lowest Kuzma lines I've seen in quite some time. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Denver Nuggets, pretty easy matchup. Allowed the 13th most points to power forwards on the season. He's hit this in one of his last 2 games against them, so that I'm a bit unsure of. Assist-wise, he can get busy, though. 6 out of his last 10, but he's capable of getting 5, but he's also capable of finishing games on none. Against the Nuggets, he's covered in 2 straight games. Minus 104 odds for this 3.5 too. So he had 4 assists and then 7 assists most recently. I don't like betting on Kyle Kuzma, but I'm here to show you the data because there might be some Kyle Kuzma fans walking amongst us right now. Having a look at who else have we got? Aaron Gordon. I haven't bet on Aaron Gordon much this year. I haven't really liked what I've been seeing, but let's talk through this. His line's at 14.5. He's hit 14.5 in 4 of his last 10. Matchup for most of the Nuggets is going to be a great one because the Wizards are pretty much shit at everything. But 4 out of his last 10, but he's got under in his last 2 games against them. Let's have a look at his rebound line. 6.5. He's only got over in 4 of his last 10, and against the Wizards, 2 from 3 games. So Aaron Gordon, not feeling you, my friend. Let's have a look at your good mate, Michael Porter Jr. So his points line's at 16.5, which is covered in 3 of his last 10. Like everybody else, the matchup is good. In head-to-head matchups, he has covered this points line in 2 consecutive games against the Washington Wizards. So that's not bad. This recent form is a bit concerning, though, because I think the Denver Nuggets are deeper this year. Offensive-wise, I think they have some decent scorers coming off their bench. So MPJ, like he used to be a lock for 15 points, 15 points and 6 rebounds. This guy was a lock last year, but this year he's quite the opposite. So even looking at his rebounds, his line's at 6.5. He used to be a lock to get 6 boards. Line at 6.5, 4 of his last 10, 8 of his last 20. So that's a bit inconsistent. And even against the Wizards, 7 and then 5 as well. All right, let's take a look at Nikola Jokic. His points prop is at 27.5. Seems pretty high. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. The Wizards allow the second most points to centers on the season. Head-to-head matchups, Jokic has murdered these guys, scoring 43, 31, and 42. So I love scoring against the Washington Wizards. He scored the ball quite well, but he hasn't covered this line very well over his last 10 games. So I don't mind that. Looking at his assists, his line is at 9.5. You can get that for plus money. He's gone under in 5 consecutive games, though. Head-to-head matchups against the Wizards, he's gone under in all of those games as well. So Jokic under an assist, I could fuck around with that, to be honest. And I do think he'll favor to score points potentially, but we don't know if Jamal Murray's going to be there or not, right? So I'd be a bit reluctant to take any Jokic bets right now until we know if Jamal Murray's going to play. But based on the data we see here, assists definitely leaning to the under, points leaning to the over. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 12.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is perfect. The Wizards give it the most rebounds to centers. But Jokic has gone under in 2 straight, getting 12 rebounds in his last 2 games against the Washington Wizards. All right, we're jumping into the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Golden State Warriors. Before we get into all the players, let me just quickly check the injuries real quick. AD, game time decision. LeBron's out for this game. Cam Reddish's game time decision. And for the Warriors, Chris Paul is still out. Gary Payton's a game time decision too. So a lot of key players missing in this one. So with LeBron out, does make things quite interesting from a betting perspective. But let's take a look at Jonathan Kuminga first. So his points prop is at 18.5 in this game. Looking at that, he's covered it in 4 of his last 10 games. He's gone under in 5 out of his last 6. In terms of the matchup, it's a somewhat difficult matchup, but not really. LeBron's not going to be there. He's gone over in 4 of only 10. He's only covered it in 1 of his last 9 games against the Lakers. The only time he did cover it was that most recent game they played at the end of January, where he scored 22 points. So outside of that, Not a fan of his points prop right now. I think is right on the money. So if anything, I'd lead in the under for Jonathan Kuminga. Looking at his rebound prop, line's at 5.5. He's covered that in 5 of his last 10. And from the 9 games against the Lakers, he's only covered it twice. But he did get 9 rebounds in that last game against them. He did play 43.2 minutes. I believe that was an overtime game. So you probably have to relax the numbers right there. But Jonathan Kuminga, I think he's probably good for 15 points. But yeah, I wouldn't take his full line. Not at those odds anyway. Having a look at Steph Curry. Now, Steph's line for this is 30.5. That's crazy. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games. The matchup with the Lakers is a decent one. The Lakers allow the 9th most points to point guards on the season. Steph Curry, the last 9 games against the Lakers, he's covered this 4 times. He's covered it in his last 2, scoring 32 and 46 points against the Los Angeles Lakers. Looking at these numbers, I probably lean to the over, but I don't often bet on players with their lines over 30. Just saying. That's just a lot of points, and a lot of things could happen that gets in the way of that. Whether Klay Thompson goes off, Kuminga goes off, the game becomes a blowout, foul trouble. A lot of these things can derail this bet. So I'm quite tentative in taking Steph Curry over in points, but I do think he's going to go over in points. Another interesting one for Steph is looking at his assists. His line's at 5.5, but that's minus 135. He's covered that in 5 out of his last 10 and 6 out of his last 9 games against the Los Angeles Lakers. He did just scorch them for 40-something points. So to make the assumption that the Lakers have a game plan to stop Steph from shooting, I think that's a fair assumption. And they might force him into becoming a playmaker. So the assist side of things, I could see that happening. But at minus 135, you've lost my interest. No, thank you. Who else is there for this team? Klay Thompson. Let's make it quick. Let's go through his points prop. Line is at 15.5. I think he's coming off the bench now. 15.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. Scored 35 points in his last game against Utah. And against the Lakers, he's covered in 6 out of his last 11, including 24 in the last matchup against the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't know how to say this guy's name. Podziemski? Podziemski? I'm not sure. But I do know that this man racks up stats. So looking at his points prop first, it's at 12.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. Scored 10 points in his last game against the Los Angeles Lakers. The bet that I do like is assists and rebounds for him. He can really pull in some good numbers. His line's at 5.5. You can get that for plus 140. He's hit this in 4 of his last 5, 5 out of his last 10. Last matchup against the Lakers, he had 5 assists. So it's very close. He played 28 minutes in that game. And looking at his rebound prop, line is at 6.5. And this is a guard, right? This is a guard. Covered in 6 out of his last 10. And he had 7 rebounds in his last matchup against the Lakers. Played 28 minutes. Curious to see, over his last 10, he's averaging 33.3 minutes per game. So after that stint against the Lakers, he's been promoted into the starting lineup, and he's playing a lot more minutes. So he's producing a lot more now than he was back then. Let's check one of my favorite picks to bet on, and that's rebounds and assists. Yeah, I don't mind this. Over 12.5 rebounds and assists for Podziemski, plus money. One of my favorite things in the world. He's hit this in 7 of his last 10. And against the Lakers, he had 12, right? He had 12 in only 28 minutes. He's playing at least 5 to 6 minutes more than that now. And his recent form is great. So I don't mind this for, let's call him Brandon for now. I don't mind the over in his rebounds and his assists. Jumping into AD, Anthony Davis. You'd assume he's going to play. And if LeBron is out, they're going to need him to play if they have any chance of winning. But his points prop is at 28.5. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10. The Warriors, somewhat decent matchup against him. And AD has covered this line in 3 out of 11 games against the Golden State Warriors. He did score 29 points in that overtime game in January. He played 44 minutes, though, and he shot the ball 24 times, but he only connected on 11. So that wasn't great given the extra opportunities. Looking at his rebounds, though, line's at 13.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10, and he only had 13 rebounds in his last game against the Golden State Warriors. I think the assist prop could be an interesting one, and I'll show you why in a second. His line is at 3.5. He's covered in 3 of his last 11 against the Warriors. In his last 10 games, he's covered it in 5 out of his last 10. So the Warriors have a great matchup here. AD has a great matchup against the Warriors, who allow the 4th most assists to centers on the season. Now, if LeBron James is actually out, let's check out AD's numbers without him. So he's covered in 4 of his last 10 games without LeBron James. So that's not very convincing. Looking at his points, let's do his points without LeBron. If I can find him. There he is. So AD's covered this in 5 of his last 10 games without LeBron James in the lineup. Against Golden State, he scored 39 points the last time he played versus the Warriors without LeBron James. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Anthony Davis in this matchup, I must say. So looking back into this game, we're not going to bet on Kuminga or Draymond Green or Andrew Wiggins. I have made a few bets on Andrew Wiggins as of late, but I don't like him in this matchup. But yeah, I think they're really the only 2 that I do like in this game. Let's jump into the last game, and then I'll get back into the lab and finalize my picks. So we're looking at the Sacramento Kings versus San Antonio Spurs in this game. I think there's a few key players who are game time decisions. Well, that's a lie. I think there's one, and that's Domantas Sabonis. So he's got an illness, game time decision, but a very important piece of the Sacramento Kings. So I wouldn't make any bets on this game unless you know whether that man's playing, because he impacts a lot of stats and a lot of opportunities. So let's have a look. Jeremy Sohan, his line is at 11.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The Kings allow the 4th most points to power forwards on the season. So he's got a good matchup, but he hasn't done well against them. He's only covered in 1 out of his last 4 games against the Sacramento Kings. Looking at his rebound prop, it is 5.5. He's covered in 2 of his last 4 against the Kings and only 4 of his last 10 on the season. So I'm going to jump out of him because I'm not liking what I see. Let's have a look at Devin Vassell. His points prop is at 20.5. Now, he's covered that in 7 out of his last 10 games. The Kings allow the 4th most points to shooting guards on the season, and he's got it done against them in the past. He scored 29 points in his last matchup against the Kings, but that was in 2022. Vassell, his assist prop line is at 3.5, but it is minus 145. 7 out of his last 10. The matchup is a difficult one, though. So what if we looked at points plus assists? 25.5, minus 105, 6 of his last 10. Yeah, I think the points prop is probably the best way to bet this guy if you were to bet him. But at minus 119, I wouldn't take the bet on. So that's definitely a good lean. Let's have a look at Trey Jones, and I mainly want to look at his assist prop. His line's at 6.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. The matchup is good. The Kings allow the 6th most assists to point guards. Trey Jones, 11 assists in his last matchup against the Kings, covering in 2 out of his last 4. So he definitely can get it done. Minus 102, the odds aren't bad, but I think I've got quite enough bets on already. But let's see if I can find something juicy in here. Let's have a look at Wemby. Victor Wembanyama. His points line is at 23.5. You get plus money if you take the under. Now, he's gone over this points line in his last 2 games. Prior to that, he went under in 8 consecutive games. The matchup against the Kings is a difficult one. They allow the 6th fewest points to centers on the season. But if Sabonis isn't playing, that might be a different story. So I'm saying don't bet this game till you know whether he's playing. Looking at his rebounds prop, line is at 10.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. The Kings do allow the 10th most rebounds to centers. And Wemby had 9 rebounds the last time they matched up. So once again, very dependent on whether Sabonis plays. If he doesn't play, Wemby has a good chance to have a big game. If he does play, Wemby might find it difficult. Who else is there in this game? De'Aaron Fox. Let's have a look at De'Aaron Fox. Now, De'Aaron Fox, his points prop is at 26.5. He has gone over in his last 2, but he's only gone over in 3 out of his last 10. In terms of matchups, the Spurs allow the 4th most points to point guards on the season. De'Aaron Fox has scorched the Spurs in the past, covering 4 out of his last 5. Scored 43 points in his last matchup against the San Antonio Spurs. So definitely leaning on the over here. What I'd be interested in seeing is, let's just plan for Sabonis being out. Does he play better or worse? Because I remember doing research on this, and back then I found that De'Aaron Fox scores less points when Domantas Sabonis isn't there. So let's have a look. So he's only had two games here without Sabonis. Is that right? Yep. 2 games without Sabonis, 26 and 31 points. All right. Well, that's not overexciting, is it? Well, there's De'Aaron Fox without Sabonis, so let me screw that one off. Points prop, though. He's started to pick it up his last two. Phoenix versus Denver. He started to explode. Is that enough to say that his form has changed? No, but it is a step in the right direction. He's got a good matchup, and he's got it done against him in the past, so definitely one to consider. His assist prop is at 7.5, though. That's quite high. The matchup is good, of course, but he's hit this in 2 out of his last 10. Against the Spurs, he's only hit this in 2 of his last 5. So, yeah, I'd be a little bit hesitant there. Combining the 2 points and assists, 2 out of his last 5. Against the Spurs, and only 3 out of his last 10. So, I think we need a little bit more overperformance from De'Aaron Fox before I start to take his props again. Who else is there? Malik Monk. I usually like betting on Malik Monk, so let's see what the numbers reveal. So, his line you can get at 19.5 minus 105. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. The matchup is somewhat decent. The Spurs allow the 9th most points to shooting guards. Malik Monk has covered this in 2 consecutive games against the San Antonio Spurs. So that's pretty good. They only played once so far this season. Malik scored 20 points in that game. He only played 25 minutes and he shot the ball only 11 times. So shot a high percentage. Don't mind that for Malik Monk. That's definitely a lean for his points. Looking at his assists, his line is at 6.5. He's only covered that in 2 of his last 10. The matchup is excellent, but in head-to-head games, covered that only once, getting 8 assists and going under in all the others. Who else is that? Keegan Murray. I think I might have this guy as a lean. That I do. So Keegan Murray, what I'm looking at really is just his whole PRA. So this guy, I've noticed, goes under a lot, and he goes under easily. So in his last 10 games, he's only covered this PRA of 24.5 twice. He does have a good matchup for points, rebounds, and assists, but against the Spurs, despite the good matchup, he's still performed terribly. He's gone under in 4 straight games against them. Only 2 of his last 10 and in 7 out of his last 20. But really, the last 10 to 15 games is where he's been quite average. So that's definitely a lean of mine. And that's just because the numbers are telling me that he's not playing well. Despite the matchup, Keegan Murray hasn't been performing. So 24.5, we see the line elevated because of his competition. Definitely a lean of mine right now. But yeah, I'm not saying to take it, but that's definitely where I'm leaning. So thank God the NBA is back. Now, after previewing 12 games over the last couple of hours, after having a 7-day break, I must tell you that was somewhat exhausting. I've had about 12 glasses of water. It's about 30 degrees Celsius right now. It shouldn't be because it's nighttime. So I'm uncomfortable. There's mosquitoes in here. But I got to tell you, I'm pretty pumped and excited about the NBA tomorrow. I'm not going to lie. 12 games. There's a lot of action. I've got quite a few bets on. I've got a lot of leans. So be sure to check the pinned comment to see what I'm betting on. Also, let me know in the comment section if you guys are down for this. There is a section on YouTube in my community page where I could set up like an elite version of members. It's like $4.99 a month or whatever it is. Basically, what I want to know is, would you be interested in me setting that up? You would have to pay $4.99 a month or whatever it is. And what I would commit to doing for those people who do that is, before I do all my editing, before I dive into all the recording, if I already have my picks planned, I'll just share my picks straight away. So that way you guys can get on before the lines start to move. If you don't rate me as a sports bettor, that's completely fine. I personally don't rate myself that highly as a sports bettor. I just have good numbers. Maybe I'm lucky. But if it's something that you do want to get behind, let me know in the comment section and I can create it. The only thing that's really holding me back from doing it is wondering if anyone would actually do it. So let me know in the comment section. Do you think it's worth me creating that community page? $4.99 a month or whatever it may be, but you'll get all of my picks a few hours before the videos actually come out. So let me know in the comment section. Another thing, if you are watching, I've recently been knocking out a few great interviews, so be sure to check those out. There'll be links, pop-ups, wherever. You know what it is. But other than that, best of luck. May the gambling gods be on your side. Gamble responsibly. Practice bankroll management. All of that good stuff. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to your line from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.